Hi folks, this is Eric from Re3D, and I'm just going to walk you through installing the software for your Gigabot and talk a little bit about some of the parameters and some of the software that you need. So to get started here, we're at the Re3D website, and if you'll actually just go to wiki.re3d.org, which I've been to before, so it pops up. This is our wiki, which we have a lot of information on, but it's particularly useful because we have a quick start guide right here up on the front page that'll help you get the software set up. So if you go ahead and click on Quick Start Guide, this talks a little bit about some of the software that you're going to use. The two most important pieces of software are Slicer and Print Run. Slicer is a program that slices all of the models into Z components, essentially planes on which the XY coordinates of the head and print head will run to actually build your model. Print Run actually feeds those components or those coordinates to the machine. So it's also called Printerface. But right down here we have just the steps, and this is the steps that you need to go through to configure your printer and get started printing. So I'm just going to go through each one of these and show you what you've got to do. So the first thing to do is to download and install Slicer. Slicer is the slicing software again, and we have a quick link here for you. So you'll download whatever is the most recent version for your type of computer, whether it's Mac, Windows, or Linux. I happen to be on a Windows 7 machine here, so I'm going to click Windows. And then I see here that I have an option for the x64 or x86 version. Now what this is it's a 64-bit or a 32-bit machine. If you don't know what kind of machine you're on and you're in Windows, an easy way to find out is to actually go to the Run and say System, and then in the Control panel you'll find System, and right down here you can see whether you're in 64 or 32-bit. So that's just a quick tip to know which one to download. I happen to use a 64-bit machine, so I'm going to go ahead and download that. I don't need to wait for this because I actually have already downloaded this, so I'm going to cancel this, but you would download it all the way. And I'm going to go ahead and open my downloads folder where it is, and right here I see Slicer MS-Win x64. So I'm going to open that zip file, and it's important that you unzip this right now and move it to an actual folder on your desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder for this on the desktop by right-clicking and selecting New Folder, and then just call this Slicer. Alright, and then once I've created that, I'm going to go ahead and take this and just copy it over to that new folder. So it's about 36 megabytes, so not small. It might take a little bit of time to download depending upon your connection. But once that is in there, we're going to go ahead and take a look real quick back at the wiki just to check our next step. I'm going to back up here. And we're going to need to download and install Print Run next, or Printerface as it is also called. So we also have a link for that here. So I'm going to go ahead and follow that. And I'm going to pull down the Windows version that is most recent. This is March 10th, 2014, so I'm going to pull that down for Windows. If you're on a Mac, get the Mac one here. So that is going ahead and downloading. I've actually already downloaded this as well, so I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to go back to my Downloads folder, and then I'm going to grab my Print Run. Which is right here. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Since this is a zip folder, I'm going to go ahead and move all of this stuff over to that folder that I created. So we'll just wait here as this happens. And if it might be too big, I can actually go ahead and cancel it, but it looks like it's going. So let me go ahead and just skip this. Alright, now that I've got that in my folder here, I've got my folder that I'm working with, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to the wiki. Should start off where we were. So now that I've installed Slicer and Print Run, I'm going to go ahead and download the test file, which is the 20mm box. Now all this is a box that's 20 by 20. I believe the dimensions are that you can test your printer to see if it's working out okay. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. I already have a copy of this, but yours might not look exactly like this because I have them tied to NetFab. But you're going to need this in just a minute. So now it asks you to download the Slicer configuration file. Now what this is Slicer has a lot of settings in it, and we want to make sure that we capture the right settings, particularly for the Gigabot. But this is also useful to tweak and make your own configs. So just go ahead and click on that .ini and download this. Now if you click on it and you see this, that's just Chrome taking a look at it. So you're going to want to right click and say save link as, and then save that as an INI down wherever you want to. I'm going to save it in the folder that I have created in this video. So once I've got that, I'm going to go back and take a look at my next step, and it says to slice the test file. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Slicer here in this folder, and Slicer exe is right there. There's the console and the exe. You're going to want the exe. Go ahead and run that, and I have a firewall that's stopping me from doing this, so I'm going to go ahead and allow. Since I know that this is a safe program. And Slicer pops up. So this is the main interface for Slicer, and what I'm going to want to do first here is go ahead and load that config file. So if I go over here to File, Load, and then I go to that folder that I have created on my desktop, then I can grab that config and load it. Now, I know that it has loaded, or a way to check that it has loaded is to go over to the far right tab for printer settings, then come down to Custom G-Code. Click on that. Now, if you have a bunch of commands in here, or these particular commands, and yours match these or are close to these, then you have in fact loaded the config file properly. If it does not, or if Slicer closes for any reason, then you have not appropriately loaded this. You will have to load this each time that you open Slicer, so just keep that in mind. So what I'll do now is I'll talk a little bit about Slicer and then what some of the settings are. Slicer is the most important part of getting a good quality print because you are telling it how you want that print to be. So what you're going to do first here to print that test cube is we're going to go ahead and add a file. And I have a whole bunch of STL files here, which is typically what you'll be printing. But what I'm going to go ahead and do is grab the STL for that 20mm test cube that we have earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. And then I have the 20mm box STL. I downloaded it again for this video. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. And what you see here in what is the plater is your 20mm test cube. Now if this cube is much larger, then that probably means that you haven't applied the settings, because it is showing that we have a very large 600 by 600 bed that is the size of the Gigabot. If it is larger than this in the screen, then you probably haven't loaded the configuration right. So go back and try that again. So what we're going to do here is, if I go to print settings, I'm going to walk you through just a couple of the steps here to just let you know what some of these do. So if I go to layer and perimeters, this layer height and first layer height is the height of each layer in z-axis. So it's 0.3175 millimeters for each layer. You can make this smaller to make a finer print, but it will take longer because it has more layers. The vertical shells, the perimeter at the minimum, So this is how many shells on the side that you want for each layer on the outside. And Slicer can actually change this dynamically for certain things. Spiral vase is in the case that you want really only a one-sided vase that corkscrews all the way up in one constant extrusion of filament. You can use that. Solid layers on the shells here, top and bottom. If you want a thick top or a thick bottom, you can increase that to 3, 4, or 5. This is useful to get a really thick base or a really thick top to get a really nice fine print or surface. Some of these are experimental features for Slicer, and I won't go into those just now, but the ones in layer and perimeter that I've talked about already are the most important. For infill, this is the density that you want the inside or hollow portion of that cube to be. So 25% is pretty good. Anything over 30 or 40% is a lot of plastic, but you can do that if you want to make it much more solid. The fill pattern is either a rectilinear, line, concentric, honeycomb, or some other ones here. The ones that I use that are most popular are honeycomb and rectilinear. Rectilinear being squares and honeycomb being, of course, a hexagonal pattern. So also the infill, combining infill every 1 layers means that I'm going to have infill every single layer. So that's important to leave that way. You can add solid infill and some other things here. Those aren't terribly important, just getting started. Your speed settings, just leave those right where they are from the config. The skirt and brim are important. If you are having trouble getting your extrusion started because of plastic dripping out, doing a couple of loops or a skirt around the outside of your object before it starts printing will get that head extruding nice and fine. So I typically do 2 or 3 loops. And the distance is just the distance of that skirt from the object. It does not touch. If you move this to 0, it'll touch. And then the skirt height, I typically leave at 1 layers. There's no reason to make a multi-layered skirt. So a brim actually does in fact touch this object, or can be on the outside of the object if you want it to be. Finally, support material is important. We leave this unchecked most of the time. You need to generate support material as general rule if you are exceeding 45 degrees in the horizontal plane. So if you're trying to build something that's got a big curve on it that is going out over empty space in the middle of the air, you're going to need to generate some support material. The overhang threshold indicates where that support material will be generated or at what angle. Also, a raft is important. If you're having trouble getting it to stick to the build surface, if you haven't used the right tape, blue painter's tape, or you don't have build tack material, then it is important potentially to build a raft that you can later remove to keep it stuck to the bed. So that's really all that I'm going to go through here. That's all you'll probably need to get started. When you are done with those settings, you can move your object around the print bed if you want to print somewhere other than the center. I'm going to leave it right there. And you can go ahead and export that G-code. So I'm going to go ahead and export that straight to that same folder that I've been using here. And it will generate all the perimeters and export that. So now I'm going to go ahead and head back to the Quick Start Guide just to see what I'm doing. So I've sliced the test file and I've gotten this G-code. If you can't get the G-code or you're having trouble, go ahead and download this G-code that we've created for you and remove the text extension on it. So you're going to go ahead and connect to your printer now. Go ahead and flip the printer on and then connect to it. I'm not going to do that because I've already done it. You should see some drivers install automatically if you're in Windows that should search on the internet for them and pull them down just fine. And it's slightly different if you're on a Mac. But go ahead and load the G-code file into Pronterface. So to get to Pronterface, I'm going to go back to that folder that I have right here. And I'm going to go ahead and run Pronterface. I like to put this on my desktop. But I'm going to allow this. now with Printer Face installed, we've got it open here, and then I'll tell you how to connect to your printer. If you haven't already, go ahead and flip your printer on, the power. And that's the fan that you likely hear in the background. And go ahead and plug in your USB to communicate with your printer. And then you'll go ahead to connect to the printer. You'll go ahead and press this button here that says connect. And once you get Echo SD card OK, you are done. That's because I have an SD card in there, I believe. So, but in any case, these are the controls to control your printer in the X, Y, and Z planes. So the X and Y control the print head moving it around the surface, and the Z controls the up and down movement of the build platform. This white button here is the auto home, and this will bring the print bed all the way up and to the 0 position. You actually have to do this to tell the printer where 0 is, or where the base is, and you set that by setting the Z-axis set screw to the right height. So please make sure that you follow the setup guide for leveling your bed and making sure that your print head clears before you go ahead and do this, especially if you have moved the X or Y coordinates to move the print head onto the bed, because you can crash your head into the print bed if you're not careful. So if you do press this, you might be able to hear the motors of the printer running in the background, and this will move it to a 0 position. You can disable the stepper motors in the Vicky LCD to go ahead and try to check to see if the print head is at the right height to make sure you're not crashing it into the bed. But this will actually control everything that the printer does from here on out using that slicer file that we sliced earlier into G-code. So I'm going to go back to the guide that I have online just to check where we are. And we're at step 7, which is load your file into Printer Face. So we're going to take that file that we had earlier created in the G-code. Remember, this is not an STL file, it is a G-code file. And we're going to go ahead and load that into Printer Face. So I'm going to go to the folder that I had created earlier for exactly this video, and I'm going to load that 20mm box. Now you'll know that it's loaded when you see the box in the center of the build plate. If this box looks at all larger to you, then you'll have to go and make sure your Printer Face settings are correct. If you go to Settings, Options, and then down to here, you can set and make sure that the build platform is 600mm wide, deep, and high. So that's the 2-foot cube build volume that the Gigabot has. So mine is already set, I don't have to. You're going to have to set your serial port to the highest number that is there. Mine happens to be COM7. And you'll have to set the baud rate to 250,000. That is in here. So make sure that your COM port is usually the highest that is available, and then 250,000 for the speed, and click connect if you weren't able to connect already. So in any case, make sure that your settings are like mine here, and what we're going to do is actually heat up the print head and the bed if you have a heated bed. But we've loaded this file and we see the representation of the first layer. An interesting trick here is if you want to, you can double click on the image of the file and watch as each layer is built in preview. You can see all of the paths that were determined by your slicer settings. In this case, every layer is just a box, but this is very useful for previewing. We're going to go ahead and calibrate the printer by following the parts kit assembly instructions. I will not do that here because that is an involved process, or can be, but go ahead and do that. Once you're done with that, go ahead and home the axes by using the home button here, and that should bring the bed up. If anything goes wrong here, it is best to turn the printer off manually to make sure you don't do any damage to any parts. So then once you've done all that, you're going to go ahead and heat the hot end. This can be 200 degrees for PLA, polylactic acid, or even higher for ABS. I like to use 185 degrees Celsius for PLA. So I'm going to go ahead and click set. This will turn orange. You can see my set temperature jump up. If you don't see this, you can click watch here in the graph to watch everything happen. And you should start seeing this climb right here, this blue line, indicating that the hot end is heating up. If you do not see this after a few seconds, then definitely turn the printer off and make sure that you're not overheating the nozzle. The thermistor might not be properly seated in the nozzle tip, as is said here. So once this is heated and not before, you'll go ahead and try to extrude some plastic. I have mine set to 10 millimeters. Typically this will be set to 5 by default, but once this gets up to the target temperature, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And we are almost there. You'll typically see the temperature rise and kind of crest out over the target temperature and then come back and normalize. So this is normal. Don't be concerned if you see that. But once it's up that high, you can go ahead and try to extrude some. And you should see the gears of your print head turning and moving some filament out. If you don't see anything coming out of the tip, you can try this a little bit more. You might be filling up some cavities in the hot end. But a way to check to see that filament is in fact going in is to just put your finger on the filament itself to feel that if it's moving in. If it's not moving in, you might want to check the tension on your screws or see if your knurled bolt inside the print head or the extruder is clogged with some plastic or something, or is not gripping properly. In any case, if that works, you're going to go ahead and again make sure that your print head does not collide with the build platform, but you're going to go ahead and click print and print your object. So I'm going to click print here, and it should begin to do its procedure to extrude a little bit of plastic, then go out to the center of the bed and begin printing this. If anything goes wrong at any point during this, don't feel afraid to switch off your printer to prevent it from doing any damage to itself, to any of the motors if you do have a collision. But once you've done this, keep an eye on your print. Make sure that your print is adhering to the bed. If you do press pause in Pronterface, which is here, here's where you go ahead and start that print. And if you do have to pause, please keep in mind that the printer will not actually pause until 8 steps have been executed in the G code. So if you're going around a curve, since curves are made up of small lines, that should happen very rapidly. If you're doing a large box, then this actually could take some time because it has to get to 8 different corners. So right now you can probably hear the printer in the background, and it's trying to make that test box and is doing just fine at it. Watch your print here as you're printing on it. Make sure nothing's going wrong. And then when it's done, the nozzle will go ahead and shut down automatically, or you can do it manually and auto home everything if you'd like to using Pronterface here with the auto home button. You can go ahead and turn off the heat in the bed if it hasn't done that automatically, and then take a look at your print and see if anything could be improved. Well, with that, the Gigabot is going ahead and printing my test cube here, and that is the end of our tutorial. So we hope that you have a good experience setting up your printer, and we hope you're really excited about it. Thanks very much. This is Eric from Re3D. Have a great day.